Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 2 of Inside the Museum. My name's Tonya, I'm the manager of Tudor House Museum in Worcester, and we're joined with Anna, who's the engagement officer, Tim, who's one of our volunteers, our research volunteer, and Jenny Waugh, who is our guest today. So Anna.
Yeah, very exciting.
Absolutely.
Roll of honour here.
Anna, cue music.
So I think we should sort of start by saying that although we hope that by the time this comes out, we will have come out of lockdown, places will be reopened, life will be quote unquote back to some semblance of normal. We are not actually recording from inside the museum today, are we? We are very much not there, because sadly Tudor House is closed now until the 2nd of December. Is that the current plan?
In theory, yes, we're closed until the 2nd of December. Government guidelines, obviously that's not through choice. We haven't all decided we'd like a lion every morning. That's fine. Yes, we just have to wait and see. It's a changing situation around the world.
Yes.
So yeah, we can't really do anything about it. Although I keep saying the doors are shut, but we're not closed, because we're doing so much online and we have so many activities and things that are coming up, and your talks, Anna, that you're doing. So we're still pedaling fast behind the scenes. It's like the swan, gliding serenely, looking like nothing's going on. And then underneath there are these webbed feet just in constant rotation to try and keep us moving. There are all sorts of projects and admin and grant maintenance and things like that go on in a museum that you can do very comfortably from your own home.
Indeed.
Yes, on the dining room table with a chair that gets uncomfortable after an hour.
yes. Not quite so good, yes. But yeah, there are so many various, I mean, not just us as well, but so many people are doing so many sort of Zooms and online seminars. I think you could probably find a different heritage thing to do every day of the week if you were that way inclined, which of course we all are. But it is nice, I think, to engage perhaps a different audience at different times through the online talks, seminars, podcasts that everyone's doing. At the same time, it will be really nice to be back there. As drafty as the museum can be in places in December, it will be nice to be back there. We very much hope in December.
Yeah, absolutely. It was strange reopening, to be honest, because we had to drop our usual all comers welcome approach, which is just rock up and we'll let you in, and instigate a booking system, which we've never used before. And it works quite well, but that limited the number of people we could have in the building, and that does, everywhere will be having that. That has a knock-on impact on not only your visitor numbers, but the donations revenue, income from the coffee shop, things like that. So it's been a very strange time, but what was really wonderful about reopening is that the volunteers that could come back did. That there are a number still self-isolating for various reasons. And the ones that could come back, they were just over the moon. I don't think it's properly appreciated what a lifeline a role like that is to the people doing it. It really fills a gap for them, whether that's social or professional, whatever reason they've got for it. It was really important to them. We are putting in different ways. We've started up a weekly phone round system so that those volunteers who live on their own, especially, somebody phones them once a week to check in how they're doing. And we'll be organising a Zoom call and things like that, just so that they don't feel isolated.
Yes, I mean, museums are about, obviously they're about heritage and history and what have you, but they're about so much more than that. It's about, like you say, being a social hub and connecting people who, let's face it, all have a shared interest to some extent in heritage, otherwise they wouldn't be volunteering in a museum. But it's about so much more than that, and it has been really nice to, because I work at the museum 3 days a week, but since we have reopened, I've only been on site 1 day a week, because obviously we have a very small office and we need to think about social distancing. But it is really nice just to see people and say hello and how was your weekend, all that sort of thing. It's definitely one of the things you miss during lockdown. I think.
Yeah, and that's come out increasingly when the new lockdown Mark II, or
Yes,
Lockdown 2, the
sequel.
Bruce Willis version. That's a film I'd pay to see.
Oh my god.
Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis, that would be fantastic. But yeah, in Lockdown 2, one of the things we discussed was whether we furloughed staff again. And actually we felt, because this in theory is a short-term one, and there is so much that we can be doing behind the scenes and online, we didn't want to. But the overriding feeling is that you have this team of staff that you've built up and you've worked with, and you're all bouncing ideas off each other all the time. If that then is reduced to just one person, that's quite isolating for that one person. Speaking from personal experience,
Yes,
I
and I
found
imagine
that
a lot
really,
of pressure.
yeah, I found that really hard work, and it was as though the weight of the building had just landed on my shoulders.
Yes.
Which obviously it hadn't. You were still available. I could have called you and talked to you at any time. There was no kind of never speaking to you again.
Yes, yes.
So you're furloughed, so therefore we can't talk. But yeah, it did feel really difficult at times. So I'm really pleased we haven't had to furlough anyone this time. We'll keep going, basically.
Yes.
We're in the lucky position that we can. So.
Yeah, I'd just like to underline the point you made a bit earlier about how volunteering in the museum adds an extra dimension to your life. I retired 2 years ago, not really knowing what I was going to do other than finish the DIY jobs in the garden that I've been mounting up for years. And my 1 day a week in the university, at the museum, and 1 day a week doing research in the university library really added an extra dimension. And as Tonya says, the social side of it's great. You meet a whole load of wonderful people, not just the volunteers, but the visitors as well, because they're there because they want to know about the history and they have their own stories to tell. And that's probably the most interesting thing I found, is all the different stories people would tell related to the museum and their lives, etc.
Yeah, it is fascinating talking to visitors, what's brought them into the city, what's brought them to your door. Not just the smell of the tea cakes coming from the coffee shop.
Or the mistaken belief that we're grey friars.
Oh yeah,
it's a common one. I'm a National Trust member, I don't have to pay. No, you don't.
No, but
we should explain. Greyfriars is the National Trust property just down the road from us, and we are quite often mistaken for them and vice versa, which can make for interesting TripAdvisor reviews sometimes. But yes, it's could be quite interesting. People waving their National Trust card and saying, yes, we can come in for free. You go, you can anyway, but your card's no good here.
Takes the wind out of their sails somewhat. But they are very welcome to come and visit, and we would love to see them back again as soon as the doors reopen.
But it's a nice relationship between the two properties. I mean, when Greyfriars was open, unfortunately they're still not open, and we don't know when they will be. But we could, they were sending visitors down to us, we were sending visitors up to them, and it really just added to the feel of the street. There was a nice flow of people traffic.
Because Friar Street is so interesting, and so many of the buildings on Friar Street are sort of 16th, 17th century old, proper old buildings. But also, many of them are hairdressers, shops, what have you, and that's great. I mean, it's really nice to go and get your hair cut in an old building, but at the same time you don't get to see round it to quite the extent when you're sat there with your foils on, as you do if you're coming around to museums. So
speak for yourself. I have no need of dye just yet.
All my grey needs some covering up. There we go. Stress of lockdown putting it through.
And even those houses that don't look Tudor, you scratch the surface and you'll find a Tudor beam underneath. It's Georgian frontage, Georgian frontages behind that is usually a Tudor building.
It is very much the prettiest street in Worcester. I mean, we're so lucky it survived. It's the city took a real battering in the 1960s when the dual carriageway was cut through the centre of one of the most interesting areas, I think, and we have now behind us this perfect example of brutalist architecture in the form of a multi-storey car park. That's just behind the museum. So we could have lost a lot more than we did, and we're really lucky we've still got Friar Street and New Street, which is the next one along. They're just really pretty streets with really interesting buildings.
Really interesting to think about. I know this can sound a little bit pretentious, but when you're sort of walking to work in the morning, it is really interesting to think about all the people who would have gone before, and the fact that they would basically have seen the same buildings. Now, obviously, they wouldn't have seen the signs that say, you know, hairdressers, what have you, but the buildings themselves would have been there, and you know what their walk to work would have been like in the Victorian period, or the Georgian period, or the Tudor period, or even before it. So
yeah,
such a nice thought, I think.
I don't think, since I started working in old buildings, and I've worked in, you know, 14th century buildings up to Victorian, I don't think I've walked down a street without bumping into a lamppost, because I now constantly look above the shop fronts, because that's where you get the clues as to the origins of the building. So yeah, I'm constantly looking up, and therefore walking into small children, dogs, lampposts. The work.
And the Changing Face of Worcester website is a brilliant resource. It's got, people don't know, they've got loads of photographs of Worcester from 70s back to the beginnings of photography. And I've been doing some work on that for our Facebook page. And the pictures from the late 1800s, you could imagine it was the same street as it was today. There's been a few changes, but you can pick out the houses and you think, yes, I know that one. That's now the patisserie or the hairdressers or the bridal shop or whatever. So yes, it really brings it into focus.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point, Tim. I will mention the Change of Face of Worcester. That's a massive photography project where they have, as Tim was saying, all these amazing images of the city through from the 1970s back. And at the website, if you want to go and have a look, and you can really find yourself going off down a rabbit hole in these, is www.cfow.org.uk. Really worth having a look at and a browse. And it's nice to kind of find out where you live and what it used to look like back in the day. My house is a fairly new build, and we're actually on the site of the old football ground. So that's not so interesting for me.
So, Changing Face of Worcester, absolutely brilliant, fantastic. But the oldest photos on there are probably mid-Victorian period at best. And obviously, as we've said before, we have been here for quite a while before then. So sort of without photographs, we have deployed various other methods, and by various other methods we mean Tim, to go and research some of the older residents of Tudor House, and we are bringing back our breakneck biography segment today so that Tim can tell us about one of them. So Tim, who are you telling us about today? Which resident of Tudor House?
This will be John Cottrell, one of the original Cottrells, the Cottrell family. Long associated with Tudor House. We have a deed from 1591 with their names on it and their signatures on it as well. So they obviously had the building before 1591. The first date we have for John Cottrell is from his will, 1556, and by some strange coincidence that is actually the end date for the build of Tudor House, if we believe the gender chronology. So he's a very interesting person to investigate. He lived in Friar Street, and we know that by another fortunate coincidence, in that he pays his taxes in St. Peter's and he worships in St. Helens, and only Friar Street meets that criteria. In fact, only a small subset of houses. So I can't say 100% he built Tudor House or he lived there, but he is by far the best candidate for that role. He also did a lot of work for the corporation, and when I say corporation, think Worcester City Council of the time. First off, he was the key keeper, so he was trustworthy enough to be one of the 5 people to hold the keys to the city coffers. From there, he promoted, if you like, to being the first ever searcher and sealer of dyed cloth. So searcher, think quality control, sealer, think kite mark. He then became a councillor and actually appears on a 1555 charter, Queen Mary charter. And just before he died, he was a low chamberlain, so he could have gone on to be bailiff if he'd been lucky. He was a dyer by profession. And in his will, he left his great lead or leader and his Woden faiths to his wife, and some land and cattle to his brother and sister. But the most interesting thing is his religious beliefs, because he was probably Catholic, and he made a bequest to St. Helen's Church, and he left them all the timber that he'd bought off them previously of something called a rood loft. Why did he have a rood loft? Well, we can't say for sure. Why did he keep it? We can't say that for sure. And why did he give it back to them? We can't be sure either. But we have some ideas. So if you look on the blog later, you will see what we think about that.
Fantastic. I have to say, I am well impressed that you did that with 10 seconds to spare. So that was a fantastic introduction. Well done, Tim. So there'll be a blog post for that up on our website by the time this goes up, with more information about Mr. Cottrell himself.
Yeah. Indeed, yes. If you want to find out what a rood is, or a rood loft, and what a leader is, and a wood fanths or faiths, then go to the blog and you'll find out, and lots of more interesting stuff besides.
I will just say that rood loft is spelled R-O-O-D, not R-U-D-E, for those listening.
Okay.
So, switching gears a little bit here and coming slightly more up to date to the modern period. We are very fortunate today to be joined by our wonderful guest, Jenny. Can you say hello, Jenny?
Hello, Jenny.
Brilliant, fantastic. So, who are you, Jenny? What do you do? What's your job? Give us a lowdown on yourself.
What's your secret identity?
I am the harmless janitor. Well, gosh, my mother always has this problem. She always says, "Tell me what you do again," so I could tell my friends.
It's another thing to say. Yes,
it is. I don't know what she thinks I do, to be honest. The official title is that I'm a consultant to heritage and arts organisations, and I specialise in helping organisations, working with them to understand their audiences and their communities, to work more closely together with them. I'm always fascinated by how it works, how volunteers fit in and what they do. And so I kind of mix it up. Some of it is research and project evaluation. So when you get money from a funder, you need to have a report at the end of it to say what you did with the money and how it impacted. And it's very difficult to do the thing and evaluate the thing at the same time, to step back and watch yourself. So people hire me to come in and do that. And I tend to be quite hands-on about that, because I like to see what's going on. So the earlier I can get involved, the happier I am. And we work together I can spot what's happening, and sometimes it comes as a surprise to the organisation. Sometimes I get the evidence that confirms what they think is going on. So that kind of thing. So I do a lot of that, and I do a lot of helping people write funding bids. And then sometimes, as I have with Tudor House in the past, I actually get to be hands-on with the history and actually work with volunteers to point them at research sources, develop their own research skills, introduce them to good contacts. So with the research, I mean, Tim was already flying ahead, but we managed to get good introductions to people like Robin Whittaker and Pat Hughes, and get an into the Cathedral Library archives and so on. So I could fix that up because I've got a contacts book, and I know sort of some of the systems. So yes, so sometimes I get to actually do projects, which is good fun too.
Yeah,
I should say the size of Jenny's contact book is quite extraordinary. There isn't anyone in the West Midlands museum sector that I don't think she doesn't know.
There's lots of people.
I want to do this thing. Do you know anybody? Yes. Here's a list
of
45
people. Yes, absolutely. So this is really interesting, and it's a really I think it's a side of heritage that people don't kind of necessarily think about so much unless you are very much enmeshed in the sort of the sector itself. So how did you kind of come to it? Did you always want to be an evaluator? Did you kind of come out the womb with a little clipboard to go around evaluating people, or was it a little bit different?
It wasn't quite. My mother will tell you it was definitely not like that. It was an accident. It was an accident. I started life as an archivist, professional life. I used to work for the University of Oxford Archives as an archive assistant once I graduated. And then I did the archive management course. Well, actually, first of all, I thought I might become a teacher, but I went and spent a summer working on a French campsite running a kids club. And within about 6 weeks, I had decided that no, I did not want to be a teacher. I did not want to deal with parents. Thank you very much. Kids, great. So I went and I did the archive course in London. and worked for 8 years in a county record office. And what I found there was some amazing stuff in boxes, but not a great deal of will or desire or motivation to get it out of the boxes and show it off to the world at large. So archives they're very difficult to exhibit because they're documents. So the content of the document might be extremely exciting, but what it looks like is less so. It's hard to comprehend. That's where museums always have the edge, because they've got objects which are very easy to sort of look at and be struck by straight away. So long story short, I luckily got a job with the BBC working on the People's War project, which was the great big, can't remember the number of years now, 60th, 70th, 2004.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Something like that, anniversary of, first of all, the D-Day landings, and then, of course, the end of the Second World War. And I came back to the West Midlands and worked right across it with community groups, old people's groups, museums, libraries, outdoor. We did a whole load on land girls with wildlife, the local wildlife trusts. There were some amazing organisations that got involved in inspiring people. And what was so thrilling was that huge community action. It was absolutely life-changing for everybody involved in it, because it had started out as a digital learning project, so that old people would learn how to type their story onto the internet in the very early days of user-generated content. And of course they didn't want to type it in, they wanted to tell people the stories. So that's where I really started working with volunteers, because we needed story collectors. So we recruited, and I trained story collectors all over the country to basically actively listen and take down and notate and then upload amazing stories from people. There was one glorious session I did in Wales, in Cardiff, where it had to be a dual language session, because some of the older ladies taking part in the digital training really only spoke Welsh as a first language. So so as well as trying to get them to right click, we had to do all that in Welsh as well. So it was huge fun. I learned a lot. And anyway, so that sort of went on. And after that, I got a policy job, which was terribly dull, which was all about sort of, this is how you should be developing. This is what you should be doing. But I've got no money to make you do it. I'm just going to tell you to do it. Very governmental and annoying. And we all got made redundant, unsurprisingly, in the bonfire of the Quangos in 2009. So I had nothing to do. And somebody said, while you've got nothing to do, could you just write a short evaluation report for me? What's your daily rate? And suddenly I had a new career, really. So I had originally been training people how to use outcomes and think about evaluation, and suddenly I was actually definitely doing it. And it's grown since then. Started in Birmingham with a big arts in residence project, and here I am 10 years later.
Yes. So how many, I mean, do you know exactly how many projects you've worked on over the years, or have they all, have you lost track? Do you estimate?
Oh my goodness. Quite a lot.
Yes. So this is how come your contact book is so big.
I'm definitely in double figures.
So what's been the sort of, obviously Tudor House, the project that you worked on us with was very much, we were focused on the Tudor history of Tudor House and uncovering more of their sort of residents. And obviously you mentioned the lovely sort of Second World War project that started it all off.
Yes.
What in the middle? What as in middle of the period of history, not sort of the middle of of your projects? What's sort of the oldest thing, most recent thing? Most interesting thing, which is obviously Tudor House, of course.
Well, of course, yes. No, well, that is a genuinely interesting project, because what's lovely about the Tudor House, the current HLF funding to restore the ceiling, and it's also included elements around developing a young person to go on and have a career in heritage. So I interviewed the lovely Adam, who was the young conservation intern who spent a long time with his head tilted back, staring at a ceiling and picking off bits, but learning a lot and gaining hopefully employment as a result of this. I know he had the interview.
No, it was amazing. Of course, he didn't let us know because he's a young man and communication doesn't occur to them. I have a young man of my own, and if I get a one-word response to a text message, it's a miracle. But I spoke to the builders that he worked with, and we should say Adam came onto the team as part of our Revealing the Past project, and he was working with the conservation, the heritage builders, who are Hales and Howe, based in Bristol. Working on the conservation and restoration of the last remaining Tudor embossed ceiling in Worcester, which happens to be in our building. And he was really keen to get into that area of work. So we were able, thanks to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, thank you, big confetti boom, for their funding, we were able to give him a paid intern role, because I'm quite adamant that interns, they're performing a job, so pay them. There is no excuse for not doing it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we got him a paid role working alongside them, and he basically, it is all on his merit. He worked so hard and was so keen to get involved in all aspects of it. He spent 3 months during lockdown, as Jenny said, scraping off 20th century paint from the surface of this ceiling, painstakingly revealing details that we'd never been able to see before. He shifted something like 30 kilos of rubble from under the eaves of the ceiling above, the attic above, which was causing some damage. And they were so impressed with him that they invited him down for an interview at their workshops in Bristol, and he actually got the job. He's now working on site somewhere around the country, which is just, out of everything that I achieved at the museum and in terms of this project, that is the thing that's one of the things I am most proud of, because that's exactly what I hoped would happen. It's so hard to break into that industry and this sector in general. That to have given somebody the opportunity and just see them fly with it was amazing. I'm so proud of him. It is like he's my son.
I can only echo that. I mean, I've evaluated some really extraordinary projects which have some of which have been directly focused on developing workplace skills in young people. I think of the Skills for the Future programme, which was the Heritage Lottery Fund, as it was then, supporting traineeships in the sector. And so Worcestershire was lucky enough to win funding for 3 years worth, so a cohort of I think there were about 17 or 18 young people altogether over the 3 years. I think by the end of the 3 years, 12 of them had gone into the heritage sector, but all of them had secured paid employment, bar one, I think, who had other reasons. And but the one I've been most fascinated by is the Creative Bridges project, which was run by the Herbert Media team over at Culture Coventry in the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum. Now, Herbert Media is the Herbert's been very lucky having this media team for quite some time now, and it gives them an additional connector for young people. The media team are literally a team of filmmakers, photographers, digital. They do a lot of digital arts, and they are part of that museum setup. They were sort of, it's one of those wonderful council things where they kind of was sort of set up some other thing, and then they got tagged onto, and now they really make the most of it. Because what it means is, with the Creative Bridges programme, the idea was to run a series of 6-week courses, 6 or 12-week courses over a period of 3 years, working with special schools and with the job centre and with a community group that supports young people with learning difficulties. So all of the participants have some form of disability, predominantly a learning difficulty or anxiety. There was a young man with cerebral palsy, I think, as well. So, and the idea is to develop their creative industry skills, because a lot of, particularly the young guys with autism, they are incredibly adept and happy to spend hours doing stop motion animation and creating some extraordinary results. But what they don't necessarily have is a comprehension of how a work environment operates, or basic health and safety, or so on. So these guys are then tasked to create films about health and safety in the workplace, where they learn the health and safety, but they're also developing their filmmaking skills.
That's
So
so
it's and they create they made a ghost film, one group. They made like a little feature movie with a real earworm of a song, which I'm called Monster Party, which, oh damn it, it's now kicking in. And again, there were dozens of those. They also had live projects, so they created a publicity film for Fargo Village. They worked to create social media, what are they called? Social stories for visitors to the museums in the Culture Coventry Trust group, so that those are online. And they are those sort of films that are to alert people with disabilities as to what the provision is, what they'll see when they arrive, and they're made by people with disabilities. So it's not just a case of us as curators going, well, I think that might be a problem. That might not be a problem. These are the guys who know what the issues are, and they are making it for their friends and for people who share their own concerns. So that what happened with that was, it was a 3-year project with Esme Fairbairn funding, and it was an epic undertaking, because evaluating work with people with learning disabilities, you can't just sort of rock up and say abstractly, how does this make you feel to have achieved a blah blah, because it's not quite how necessarily the mindset is working. So I had to work with them to find ways with them of how we could actually work out whether this was working out, if that makes sense. So we could triangulate some of it by saying, yes, they got a qualification, yes, they got their arts award, there's all this paperwork, but where's your voice, young person who's participating? We can hear all the adults around you going, oh, it's marvelous, but what are you saying? And so that was really challenging and very difficult to explain to people going, well, how is that robust? I think it is. But what came out of that was the report I wrote was then used to get further funding. So they've now got another, I think they might be just finishing up another 3 years of extending that project and sort of encouraging other organisations to learn how to do it too. And that's, for me, if I'm doing evaluation, I want to see it being useful for other organisations. It's not just a job where I write a report and stick it on a shelf. So that's why I like to work with people, not just rock in at the end and go, oh, that looks all right.
Yes, tick.
That
Yes,
is
your feeling has been restored, and so it's all fine. It's
that is just such a wonderful project. I hadn't heard about it, but it's incredible. Have I
not shouted out about it before? Oh, sorry.
On all of our conversations over the years, that's not what you've mentioned. But no,
check them out.
I absolutely will. It's so, because as I said, it's so hard to break into this sector, especially if you're not coming at it from the traditional degree, master's, PhD, volunteering at the same time route, which can work and can't work sometimes. It's nice to have a broad life experience, I think. But it's so hard to do it if you haven't come down that route. But it's actually, I feel quite strongly, it's the responsibility of anyone in museums who's reached a level of seniority to pass it down, pass it on. Don't pull the ladder up with you. Give them the methods they need to break into it, because this is a great sector to work in. Minor irritations aside, there is room for so much creativity and for being a space that welcomes everyone. And
I think
is a privilege.
one of the big things that happens, and I think you put your finger on it earlier, is people don't see the range of jobs that there are within it as much as anything, because there's the sort of very often when I talk to undergraduates who are interested, or young people who of any kind who are interested in getting into the sector, they sort of have a vision that either they'll be doing something exquisite with a fine art painting somewhere, or that it's education. I'll be doing sessions, because that's what they've experienced. They went on a school trip to a museum and had a session, and they enjoyed it, and so they want to pass it on. And it's and I think particularly in the field I work in, which is looking at community engagement and inclusion and diversity, which is always sort of taken as a very, oh, that means I've got to work with a very particular, there aren't any diverse people near me. It's like, yeah, there are. They don't have to necessarily be an Asian grandmother with you know, one leg who might be a lesbian sort of thing. But, and I'm being a bit flippant there, but there is a very set, the number of conferences I've been at where people have stood up going, well, I'm from insert name of rural county here, and I there's no people near me. It's like, well, I bet there's a gay farmer up the road, or I bet that, you know, who doesn't come, who doesn't engage, they're your audience, they're your diversity, you know, they are people who are not you. So yeah, sorry, that's a tiny rant, but I do think it's important to try to expose, and things like kids take over, the museums take over and stuff. Those are amazing opportunities, and I've seen some fantastic responses come out of that have changed how museums operate, because they realise what we're doing isn't working.
Absolutely. No, I fully agree with you. Having come from a very rural county where it's, well, there just aren't any other people.
I know, nobody. There's nobody else
it's
here.
Only sheep.
Hang on a minute.
I
think you'll find there are, if you look outside your small friend circle. It can be quite tricky to challenge those ideas, but as I keep saying, every time I have to do a talk about increasing diversity and having an equalities action plan, that's how you survive. If you are only appealing to the circle of people that you know, you are not going to keep the doors open for very long.
And also, and because the flip side of evaluation is I also do audience survey work for people. So literally, I'm doing one at the moment for Avencroft. We're just beginning a cycle of, just as we can't actually get out and talk to anybody, we're doing it online for the moment. And I've been very heartened by the rate of response. I put an online survey out with Avencroft. And the idea is with that survey that we're checking the status quo. Who does engage and who does like Avencroft? And are they the people we think they are? What do they get from it? And are we, if we think we're family friendly, and I'm not necessarily condemning Avencroft here, but very often I have museums say, oh, we're very family friendly. Are you? How easy is it to get a pushchair in? How easy is it to change a nappy? Does the child have to lie on the floor of your toilet in order to have that happen? Can they breastfeed in the cafe? Is that okay? You know, how, when I talk about sort of that, and it's so interesting that even people who think, well, I know my audience, well, do you? And so sometimes, and I often say this with funding bids to people, it's like, before you say, I'm going to ask for an enormous amount of money to do this thing, the first thing the funder will ask you is it needed? Is it necessary? Is it what your audience actually will engage with and want? And are they in a position, you know, because sometimes you want to do something really radical and that's brilliant, but how are you going to take your audience on that journey with you? So there's all sorts of stuff going on. I love it.
And it's so interesting to think about that kind of thing, because I was sort of going to ask you that, museums say we're a family friendly museum, but then you sort of ask those kind of questions. I mean, not asking you to name any names and kind of dob anyone in here, but have you ever had, I mean, it almost sounds like, is there a museum where they say this is our audience and you turn up and say yes, it actually is your audience? Or does it tend to be, do you find that museums very much have an idea of who their audience is, and on the whole it's perhaps a little bit different, which isn't to suggest that managers all over the place don't know who's turning up, but perhaps it takes someone like you who is not enmeshed within a specific organization to come in and actually see what's going on there, you know, an outside pair of eyes,
Always.
so to speak.
It does vary. I mean, I think some people instinctively, if they're a sort of fairly flat management system like Tudor House, so you're all working you're walking the floor together every day, and you're listening to each other, and you're looking and you're talking with your visitors. Those museums generally have a strong instinctive idea, which is often quite good. It's quite strong, and what I do is prove it. So it's that bit of hiring a consultant to tell you what you know, but prove it. With other organizations, I mean, I think the classic example for me was when I started out in archives, and when I started out in county archives, there was this wonderful conception that all archive researchers were academics. We're here for bona fide. I love that. Are you a bona fide researcher? I don't know. How do I prove that?
Where are my bona fides?
Yes. Ooh, what do they look like? And actually, a survey carried out around the late 90s, when archives sort of suddenly realised they had to get numbers for things, proved that actually it was about 80% family researchers, just people who had usually would say, oh, I didn't like history when I did my school certificate, or I never did it for O level, or you know, and I love it because I found out about my grand. Can I tell you about Godalming and my granddad? Do you have to? Yes, okay, go for it. And it's that sort of the idea that you're sort of in an ivory tower about who you are and who you serve, but in actual fact that's not great. Another organisation, again in the sort of late noughties, before it changed director, was very much on the kind of, well, we do lots of school groups, so they'll naturally bring their parents back. And in actual fact, they didn't. Because it was like, they did it. And then the classic response would be, if you said to someone local to that museum, have you been to the museum? And they'd say, oh, I went with school. So I don't need to go again. I went with school.
Done.
I hear that a lot, actually, in every well, if we get the kids in for a school visit, they'll bring their parent. No, they won't. The parents are going to come. They'd have come on their own. But don't rely on your school visits to do it.
Occasionally, I mean, at Avencroft, it was very interesting. When I did the survey, we did the audience survey in 2016, and there was a small amount of parents who said, oh, you know, Nobby came and he really liked it, and so we've come back. But I think that's partly to do with the nature of Avencroft. It's an open air museum. There's lots of space for running around. It's a very safe environment, and parents nice day out, or even just 20 minutes, because a lot of their member card holders, their members of families, and they would either stop for the whole day and have a picnic, or they would be there for 45 minutes to run the energy out of the kids before they went to Auntie Edna's, because they literally they're all coming from within a 20-minute drive area. So with Avencroft, that survey, we segmented. So what we already had a strong feeling about the audience, but I then segmented it into family groups, coach trippers, and members. And it was, and suddenly it really added a lot of richness to what we thought we knew, because it was quite clear that there were some very distinctive behaviour patterns going on, and we had a big enough sample, because we got, you know, several hundred responses. We had a big enough sample to be able to really dig into it. It gave me a terrible headache over the spreadsheets, but it was that, you know, so it's, even when you think you know what you know, you can always find something else that's quite useful. I realise this is an extended plug for hiring me, but I think
people absolutely should.
We'll
no, that's true. You don't, like you say, you don't know sometimes what you don't know until someone tells you that you don't know it. So on that note, what would you say is perhaps the biggest barrier to, they're kind of referred to as non-visitors in museum parlance, so people who don't typically come to museums. What do you think is the biggest barrier to people not coming to museums? Do you think it is that a lot of places are quite expensive, or do you think it's more complex than just saying sometimes it costs a lot?
I think it's a bit more complex than that, because, you know, you'll have people who will spend a fortune on a football season ticket and not necessarily want to buy a National Trust membership, and that's to do with what they want to do and where they see themselves. And I do think there's a strong argument for, if you don't see yourself, if you don't imagine seeing yourself in a place feeling comfortable in a place, why would you go there? I will freely admit that I wouldn't go to a football match.
I've only ever been to one.
And there could be people doing football outreach out there going, she should, you know, sometimes people just aren't going to come because they're just not interested at all.
Yeah.
But I do think that if people don't feel there's something in a space for them, they're not necessarily going to touch it. So we come back to that thing of, if you say you're a community museum, how are you reflecting that to your community? If you say you collect the archives of the county of blah to reflect the life they're in, are you only collecting parish records, or are you talking to the Saturday school run by the Caribbean community? Are you talking to, you know, the sports club to make, you know, all that kind of stuff? And I think word of mouth then becomes your most powerful tool, because whenever I do surveys and ask people, how did you find out, you know, there we are all carefully calibrating our marketing and doing websites and doing leaflets. Word of mouth. A bad experience travels really fast. A good experience does travel. It does travel. And it's about what people want. People, you know, organisations like, say, the Black Country Living Museum do really well because it's almost a theatrical attraction. It's very, very immersive. And so for people who like an immersive experience, they are not necessarily the people who are going to come, say, to Worcester City Art Gallery to look at the exhibition of 20th century prints. So each time it's about thinking, well, there's a room in the world for both of those things. And that's fantastic. Sometimes you're just not going to convert some people, but other times you need to think about, well, what's the message we put out? Do we look forbidding? Do we look unhelpful? Do we look like you're not in here? You can't see yourself in here. And I think that's really interesting. And we haven't even talked about, I mean, one of the projects, Collecting Birmingham, which I worked on a few years ago, I evaluated that, and that was a fascinating project where the Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, or Birmingham Museums Trust, were given a grant award, won a grant award from the National Lottery Heritage Fund for a programme called Collecting Cultures. So it was directly to buy new material for the collections. And their plan was that it had to be chosen with and reflective of as many diverse cultures of Birmingham City as they could manage in the time allotted. And it was a really interesting process for everybody. It was the first time that the curators had done community engagement and development work and consultation work, because usually it's the community development team that do it. So you're suddenly breaking a glass wall immediately within a large organisation, because one of the things I've found is very often all this engagement work is done by people who are not necessarily the ones choosing the stuff in the collections, running the programme, running the galleries and so on. So they then went out and they for example, they went to the Central Mosque and they had a catalogue of things from Sotheby's, and they said, we think that you might quite like it if we bought this particular Islamic art related thing. And the people at the mosque, they all had a long conversation and said, no, actually, we don't think that's the right thing. We think that the other object in the catalogue is more reflective, because it was a French reproduction of a mosque lamp, and it showed how religion and faith and cultural practices transfer. And they said, we think that's more indicative of our experience.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it was so interesting, going out again to the Polish groups, to the Irish groups, and they worked with the LGBT community, not just the sort of Birmingham LGBT Big Pride, but also with an Asian group, I can't remember their names. So that was looking at racism and LGBT. So it's about, partly it was about collecting protest, because there was a certain amount there about protest and about understanding and disagreement between communities, but also it was about what represents us and how And they also bought some contemporary art pieces from artists such as Donald Rodney. They bought 2 of his pieces. They bought Basil Gabidon's guitar, who, so, you know, great reggae figure of the 70s and 80s. And it was just an extraordinary project, because what happened there was, it was about saying, you live in our collection. We're not just doing a token, here's a bit of a photography exhibition and a bit of a community thing. Your community will have life onwards in our collection. You've helped us make sure that, you know, not helped, you've told us what we should be putting in here that relates to other things in our collections, links community stories, links cultures. I only get to evaluate these things. I bask in the reflected glory. I mean, I'm so lucky that I get to see this, and then I can go and tell people about it, and it's just wonderful stuff.
I was going to say, so this is the bit where last time we closed out by saying, here are all the things. What we each said, one local and one national thing we're looking forward to going to see, blah blah blah. And then they all closed. So we think it isn't personal that happened. But Tonya, what are you looking forward to doing at whatever point you are allowed to do it?
From the comfort of my own home and or allotment. Yes, this has been, actually it's not been tricky, because I'm a massive reader. That is basically what I do, and I have quite a large library of books with me, and there are some wonderful online bookshops that you can buy from that don't begin with the letter A, so you can keep yourself stocked up. So basically I'm reading, but I'm not capable of reading apocalyptic fiction. Station 11 is a wonderful book, but it contains details of what happens after a virus changes the course of the world, and it's just, no, that's too close to home, thank you. Likewise, I'm not reading anything about the Black Death. So yes, I needed some escapism this month, so I am rereading for the umpteenth time the Mapp and Lucia series by E.F. Benson. Really looking forward to that. And on a national level, lots of institutions are putting things online, but I would recommend the University of York are doing a series of lectures based on different aspects of history, and they have they have 2 coming up in November, and I've just signed up for those. So there we are. Those are my cultural recommendations.
Oh, thank you very much. And Jenny, what are your cultural recommendations for us? Can you top Benson?
I can talk. The lamb has arrived.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so it's gone into the kitchen to put the kettle on. My cultural recommendations. Okay, well, when this year started, do you remember January? And I cut out of, I cut out of the newspapers, you know, the 50 great things to see this year, and I don't even know if they'll ever come around again. So so I've abandoned that. I think that if you're staying in, I am going to recommend the Herefordshire Life Through a Lens website, which has been put together by Capture Media. I will admit this was one of the projects I evaluated. It's an amazing, gorgeous, gorgeous online resource. Herefordshire Archives, so National Lottery Fund, again, thank you very much, provided the funding for Herefordshire Archives to digitise this incredible photojournalist collection. Derek Evans took photographs internationally, but certainly around Herefordshire through the 1950s to the 1980s of all aspects of Herefordshire life, the football club, the local folk events, jazz clubs, just oddities, the fair, the Mayfair, the annual pet blessing at the cathedral, all sorts of stuff. And then Capture Media, who are a filmmaking company, interviewed countless people from the county about hop picking, about their memory of the big goal that was scored in some FA Cup thing. Very exciting. Don't know. Big football, big football thing. And it's all on there. So there's these wonderful films of people being interviewed and their memories. There's the photographs. You can actually, I think you can watch the whole films now. So they created 2 films. One was stories from the hop fields, which is just beautiful, and it has the photographs of the hop pickers from the 50s and interviews with migrant workers today, interviews with gypsy traveller families, with Brummies who used to go and pick the hops. So it's very atmospheric and it's beautiful. And the other is Carousel, which looks at lots of the other aspects of Derek Evans' work and the subjects he photographed. So it's beautiful. Herefordshire Life Through a Lens. Google it. Go and have a play on that if you've got a spare evening. It's a joy. Getting out. I'm actually apart from the fact that we were going to see Artemisia at the National, my dears, and unfortunately we took a punt and we lost, and our date is in lockdown. But once everything opens, I'd highly recommend, if you can, back over to the Herbert to go and have a look at 13 Ways of Looking, which is a small exhibition. It takes its inspiration from a poem called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And the idea is about, how do we look at the same thing and how do we all see it? So there are 13 artists who have been who either have produced work recently or have been specially commissioned to produce work for this exhibition, and it looks at multicultural, multi-faith. It's a sort of intercultural exercise, and it sounds like it's full of heart. It doesn't sound like it's a completely academic exercise. There's some digital stuff on the Herbert website that you can have a look at, but obviously being in a gallery is pretty darn awesome as well. So there you go, those are my two.
Tim, so what are you looking forward to this month, Tim?
Right, so slightly tenuous link. Jenny was talking about speaking to the hop pickers in Herefordshire. I'm of an age where I can just about still remember hops growing alongside the riverbank. So if you went over the Carrington Bridge today, you would have seen hop poles and hops growing on the left-hand side. There must have been the last of them because they've gone for many, many years. So that leads me into my tenuous link, is the Worcester Life Stories project, which must be sort of similar to what the Hereford one. I don't think it's of larger scope because they seem to be concentrating on photographs and getting people to tell them their memories around those photographs. And they recently put up one at St Swithin's and online about the shambles, which was absolutely fascinating. And I linked that onto the Tudor House website as well, and got some lots of thumbs up for that. And they've got various workshops, which I'm going to attend one later today, and more photos will appear. So I'm not quite of the age, I don't believe, where I can give much of a life story to add to it, but I will recognise, a lot of what they're talking about. That's online. Reading wise, I've just finished a book by a lady called Alison Weir, who, to my shame, was new to me, but she is a historian, not a novelist. She writes the facts, and I've just finished her book about Henry VIII. A good friend of mine gave me a call just into lockdown and said, we're clearing out our loft of books, come and have a look, see what you want. And I grabbed 2 of these.
Nice.
Really, really hard going, because she just tends to write from what she's found in the court papers and letters and etc. So to lighten things up, I also read at the same time. So during the day I'd read this book, and in the evening I'd read the Shardlake series by C.J. Sansom. Shardlake is like your Tudor Cadfile if you don't know Shardlake, but he also has researched his period. And for everything that Alison says, Shardlake says or does something related. And in particular, the one I just read about Catherine Parr. And you read the book, it depends how you got to it in chronological terms, and you'd think, oh yes, that's the fact that Shardlake is relating to, or oh yes, I've just read about that in Shardlake, that explains it. So I wouldn't recommend sitting down with Alison Weir unless you really are interested in names and dates and places and how many bloody palaces King Henry VIII
quite a lot.
That guy was. But if you're interested in the history and don't want to just take it as read from what the novelists are telling you, then it's a good thing to go with. And the other thing, I'm not going to go for an out and about because I'm not out and about and the world isn't out and about, but maybe next time. Radio 4 Extra and Radio 4 or Radio World Service. Brilliant resources there. Drama, history, science, all the classics and all the new stuff and the contemporary stuff, comedy as well. So if you find yourself not knowing what to do, again, it is internet based, world service or DAB based, but Unreal 84 Extra, thinking about it. So, but most people have a television, hopefully, and most people should be able to
yes, you can get it on there, can't you?
Freesat and Freeview and whatever. Just check out the listings and see what there is, and there's always something that interests me.
Anna, tell us what you're up to culturally, or if you're not up to anything culturally, what are you up to vice-wise?
Well, from my from the comfort of my own home, culturally, I have recently been rereading Alison Light's book Common People, which is she wrote her family history. But it isn't just, it's not like Jenny was sort of saying, how do you get people to, can I tell you about what my great granddad did? She writes really, really interesting, because basically the whole book is conceived of, this is the history of her family, who are completely ordinary, the common people of the title. And she uses her family as specific examples, but she talks about the changes in sort of industry, lifestyle, daily life over the past sort of from about 1800 to the present day. But this sort of has a tenuous little connection, because her father's side of the family were originally from Redditch, Birmingham, the Worcestershire area. So sort of half the book talks about her father's ancestors, half the book her mother's ancestors, who are from the Portsmouth area, which I don't know a huge amount about, but it is so interesting and so fascinating to hear about the history of this area from that lens. So I've been rereading that. I've read it once before. And it is really, really fantastic. She writes, like I say, she writes about her family history, but you never feel like you're just hearing someone witter on about what great granddad did in the war, sort of thing. It is so interesting what she says about, you know, the daily life of ordinary British people over time. So that is absolutely a book I can recommend.
I do find that kind of thing fascinating, because I'm incredibly nosy about people's lives, so I want to know what they were getting up to, what they were how they were working, where they were living, what their house looked like. So I find that really fascinating, especially as it's about normal people and not you know, I've done all the kind of biographical reading of kings and queens and things like that, and actually I want to know what normal people were just having to deal with on a daily basis.
And that's one of the things she talks about, that when you go into the archives or you go online and you look for something like the census returns, you think you're looking for just, you know, your granddad, great grandma, what have you. And she talks about how she gets really distracted with the 1911 census, and she kind of goes up and down the street and finds what all these neighbours are doing. She's like, oh, and this person's come over from Ireland, and this person's like wife is 20 years younger than him, and oh, I wonder what was going on there. And the kind of the stuff that you get really into when you're doing it, it's just it is fantastic. So I'll bring that for you. You can bring your book for me, and we can do a big reading circle at the end of it. Tim can teach us through some Alison Weir, and
I sympathise with you on the Alison Weir, Tim. I have I've read a couple of hers. She's now kind of moved into historical fiction as well, so but I've not tried it.
Braved it.
It's
bit much. yes. So, and on a sort of a final note, a more national note, I am not daring to book anything, because I don't know what's going to be happening. I don't know what's going to be happening in, you know, next year 2021, where we're going to be. But one thing I have seen, and I cannot remember for the life of me who started this off, but what I will do is I will find it and I will put it in the description of the podcast so people can go and have a look. Someone started a Twitter thread of various museums' online gift shops, because obviously Christmas is coming up. And if you want to buy a suffragette keyring from a museum, but a museum is closed, you can still do so. And so there's a wonderful Twitter thread full of museums' online gift shops. And everybody I know is going to be getting museum online gift shop Christmas presents this year as a way of supporting places big and small up and down the country. And on that note, I think there may be one or two Tudor House tea cozies coming people's way as well.
My son recently started a candle making business with his boyfriend, so I'm afraid everyone's getting scented candles from me this year.
But really soothing, you know, light a scented candle, read your nice book about what have you, listen to your online talk about the other, and
have a cup of tea with a tea cozy on.
Exactly.
Stay away from the news.
Oh God.
No good can come of it.
Oh,
Right, well, thank you everybody for taking part. I think as a final note, I would just, before we all sign off and go and grab ourselves a coffee, because I don't know about everyone else, but I'm gasping. I would just like to say, whilst we're in lockdown, this is a bit of a plea and a plug. Please support your local museums, either by becoming a friend, or if you've got some cash lying around, bung it their way. They've been without income now for 7 months, most of them, if not more than that. And this is crunch time for a lot of them. And whether you go to them on a regular basis, whether you've lived there 25 years and you've never set foot in it, however you feel about them, your towns and cities would be a lot poorer without them. So yeah, send us some cash, basically.
Yes, and if you're already a member, perhaps buy people memberships. Again, as Christmas presents, stick it in their Christmas card and you're sorted. You don't even have to faff about with the sellotape. We've saved you. Just get everybody a membership, shove it in a card and you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. Here endeth the lesson.
Yes, indeed. And we would just like to say thank you again to Jenny and to Tim for joining us today on the podcast, and another big thank you to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for giving us the funding.
Oh, we love them.
For the ceiling. Yes, we are big fans. 2 thumbs up for them. And if you want to keep up with us in other places, you can find our website at tudorhouse.org.uk, and you can find us on all the usual social medias at Tudor House WUS. But again, all of that we will put in the description. And we hope to see you again next month.